Hello and welcome to episode 48 of Infrastructure Matters. I'm Kirsta Macomber and I'm joined by my co-host Camberley Bates. How are you doing today, Camberley?
Doing pretty good. Been running around on a plane and trying to stay
Yes.
healthy. There's too many people catching COVID right now on the third round around the world or something.
I know. I'm hearing a bit about it going around. It's very unfortunate. And I think Stephen, our third co-host, is on a beach somewhere. So hopefully he's having healthy and relaxing vacations. I'm sure we'll hear all about it when he gets back. Um, Yeah, but so just to jump right in here, I know we've had a few of some summer announcements here. Kimberly, you and I were both on a call earlier this week with NetApp
Yes.
regarding some updates to their portfolio. So why don't you kind of kick us off and kind of give us an overview of what they're investing in these days?
Sure. There was a huge amount of announcements in this kind of a payload, line items kind of thing, which is we're finding that a lot is happening. So it's tough to keep track of everything. Chuck Foley did the briefing with us, and then I also got on the phone with him this week to go through. Okay, so exactly, really, what does this mean, and that kind of thing. So we'll have a research note coming out on it, but give you the highlights. The big item that they announced is this thing called Blue XP Workload Factory. And Blue XP is a more or less is a control plane to enable you to manage your workloads on-prem. And people have said, I'd like to use this for my cloud solutions because they have their first party up there, right? Their cloud solutions. So what they are doing is that this is Blue XP Workload Factory is specifically for cloud workloads and specifically to help customers deploy and automate the operation, some of the operations of cloud resources for very, very specific workloads. And those are being databases such as SQL, Oracle, SAP, for VMware environments, so deploying in those environments, and then for some GenAI environments. And I'm still digging into that one. But more or less what's happening here is you're templatizing the workload best practice deployments for these environments. So and because they are complex, yes, we have it's supposed to be easy to spin everything up in the cloud, but if you're going to spin it up for high availability, you maybe cross zones and all that kind of thing, it's not just falling off the chair. It's not that easy. So this is a way to make sure that you've got consistency, that you've got everything buttoned down, that it's there's automated. Once you select some of the items that you want to have, it automatically goes out and does the work. Right now it's just for AWS. It will extend to Azure and Google by the end of the year, but kind of it's like this mini control plane that they're doing up there. So that's pretty slick stuff. So, and I also think they had some stuff going on in some protection your area, right?
Yes, yeah, and that was one thing I was gonna, kind of mention is that I thought it was interesting in Chuck's presentation that so what we've been seeing from NetApp really the last couple of years has been this emphasis on the fact that they bake in their data services as a part of, ONTAP, which is their operating system. So when we think about, their snapshot capabilities, for example, when we think about, some of their recovery operations, that was one thing that they talked about in the context of this kind of workload factory, was not only is everything templatized, but that includes, like I mentioned, kind of your data protection capabilities. So that's important. Of course, when we think about ransomware and all the cyber attacks that are happening, but also any other disasters that might need to be recovered from, plain old user error and data deletion. So I was certainly again it fit with the strategy that we've seen from NetApp, certainly, but also again I was just kind of glad to see that emphasized there.
Yeah. So they also use this time to, like a lot of other people, emphasize the capabilities that they have for Gen AI, specifically RAG. Where you're doing your training and talking about, okay, so I want to use my own data obviously sitting on a NetApp file system, to train my model. And what are they bringing to bear to enable that? And they have, if their FlexClone, their snapshots are highly super efficient capabilities, non-impactful on production. So that's the ability to do flex, either clone, snapshot, etc., that data, and to be able to use that data to rapidly train, take another snapshot, train, and also log those snapshots, so you've got a record for where you're creating the data. The other one that was kind of interesting was this thing called FlexCache that they have, and that you're able to mount a volume into a different location. So why do you really care about that? And what you're doing is, let's say my data is sitting in cloud in the UK, and the GPUs, because we have less GPUs around the world that are available, are sitting in LA. And I want to move what I can do is I can use the FlexCache to mount that volume to a different location and use that GPUs over into that other location. So it's kind of slick. I mean, it's kind of a unique space of where it's at, and I think it's a temporary situation to address the GPU shortage, but it's kind of, where is your investment kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think, from my perspective, being our data protection person, the ability to use the snapshots for training, it's funny, I've had so many conversations, especially over the last year, regarding, protection of the data that's being used to train these models, protection of the models themselves, things of that nature, but not so much around using a snapshot or something like that to train the data, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's, and to your point regarding GPU shortages and things of that nature, it was an interesting use case, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start to hear a little bit more of that, perhaps from other vendors moving forward.
Right. And if you're in the cloud, which they have, and they're talking about using the data in the cloud, having super efficient space efficiency up there is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So another one, they kind of I felt like they snuck this one in there, because, and I think it's pretty significant actually. They announced, Ontap, FSx Ontap, which is AWS's first party offering, is a file-based environment, right? It's NFS offering. They announced NVMe over TCP, which means it's block storage offering up there. And so what they've done is delivering the capability to really deliver the hard to please, performance-based database systems, VDI applications, maybe even VMware environment that they're operating on. So nice announcement for them, expansion of the market. As I said, this announcement was primarily looking at, what I'm doing up in the cloud environments and, how I'm operating up there. So it was a nice, nice wrap up there. As I said, a lot of little pieces, but they weren't actually, when you unwrap it, they're not that little. They're pretty big.
I know. I know. And it's kind of just reflecting back in the call. It's kind of like, oh yeah, they mentioned this. And, another thing I was just thinking that they were talking about from the call was around their data classification capabilities. And when we talk about the integration of these capabilities into Blue XP, for example, to apply them to these, cloud workloads, there's a lot that can be said there for the ability to not only sort of, identify kind of your sensitive and your compliance data, which is obviously important, but also we were talking about efficiency, right? And so potentially identify redundant data, especially if you are thinking about, running AI in the cloud, like we were just talking about. Another thing that there's implications for, I know we're going to get to this a little later in the conversation, but for anyone, for example, that's thinking about migrating perhaps from VMware to the cloud, we're hearing a lot of buzz about that. Obviously those data classification capabilities are going to be critical there. So anyway, like you mentioned, more to come, a lot of kind of little pieces there, but certainly kind of a powerful announcement.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And you had some, it's July, so we don't get a whole lot of announcements going on. So Maybe you want to talk about one of the other ones that came out this week?
Yeah, so this one is dropping, I believe, the day before this episode is going to air. And this is a very interesting development that I'm seeing across the data protection space. So, specifically, what we're seeing is that so Druva is expanding its threat hunting capabilities in terms of the indicators of compromise that it supports. And it's also offering managed detection and response for Druva backup environments. So I wanted to call this out because this is a trend that I was alluding to in terms of data protection companies getting not only more into the ability to detect attacks that are occurring in that protection environment, but also the ability to support incident response. A great example is we saw Veeam acquire Coveware in late April of this year, and it's a very smart.
Remind the viewers what that does.
Yeah,
What
so
that.
Clover is an incident response company. So what Veeam is doing is Veeam is integrating Clover's intelligence into threat actors and their behavior, as well as Clover is consulting with clients on how to best approach incident response. So the Clover side is it's on one part sort of an information and kind of technology that's going to be integrated into the Veeam platform, but it's also kind of those the ability to again kind of consult around incident response. For Druva, they've long been driving kind of this as a service kind of delivery model. So what I'm seeing come out of this announcement is more kind of these capabilities baked into the platform. So kind of 24/7 365 monitoring for the threat actors, having runbooks and automation there to sort of not only maybe lock down backups or snapshots, but also maybe to kind of kick off automated recovery processes to support those incident response workflows. So I just find it very interesting because to me, I mean, incident response is it's very strategic. It encompasses many different organizations in the company. And of course, it's something that when we think about reducing the amount of downtime, coming out of a cyber attack, it's again really just critical. And these announcements are just showcasing kind of the role that data protection can play there. And it's really helping these companies to, again, really evolve into that, that very strategic, relationship there with customers. So
Yeah. And that's kind of glides a little bit into this next discussion. Randy Kearns and I were traveling this week and had opportunity to really kind of talk about some of the client engagements he's involved with. Many of you guys know Randy from Evaluator Group, and he's still involved with some of our customers and IT end users and kind of thing. And part of that discussion was talking about what's on the minds of the data guys in the IT operations place. So, and the data infrastructure guys, and we were chatting about this about what's critical to them, because that's who he's talking to all the time. And while we have spent so much of our time talking about Gen AI and AI applications, which is really at the BU side of the house and the executive side of the house, what's hitting the guys on the floor and they're dealing with, as he sees it, as two primary issues. Number one, cybersecurity and the constant work that's there. And I think you have been hearing it because you've been talking to CISOs, et cetera, about the constant pounding that's going on. It's just over and over and over. And the other one was VMware and the consternations around. And so it's not only him talking about it, but the last, I don't know, it just seems like every conversation I'm having, and we need to talk about VMware, and we need to talk about VMware. And, and the question is what are you seeing? And so I thought I would talk about what I'm seeing right now, where our predictions are, because they haven't really changed from when all of this hullabaloo started in the spring.
mm-hmm.
And because most enterprises are looking at, what am I going to do? here's my bill just went up by 30%, 40%, or whatever it's going up to. So I need to kind of address the issues that are going around there. And so I'm holding true to a couple different things. One is that we're going to see the small business guys probably migrate off of some of the VMware environments. Scale computing, Nutanix have got some fabulous offerings that are there. They are virtualized. They're integrated systems that can be implemented by these guys. So we're probably going to see that migrate off of VMware. The next guys up, the larger companies, are going to make some decisions, and they have some hard decisions to make. And the biggest areas they're having to make the decisions is around people, processes, and procedures.
Interesting.
Well, the amount of investment, the bigger the company is, the amount of processes and procedures you have, and how much you've invested in those people, cost is huge.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been talking about it from the standpoint of sort of just like you mentioned, the complexity, the risk, the cost of migrating off of VMware for these large shops, right? But in my mind, I wasn't necessarily framing it from the standpoint of the people behind the scenes and sort of the processes. So it's very, very true.
I mean, it's the same thing we looked at when we've done any other big migration that comes over.
Yep.
And they're big migrations. So that when we looked at it, we said, okay, so a lot of the new development, maybe the new development is going to happen on a Kubernetes platform, OpenShift, SUSE, whatever, Rancher. So I start developing up there. But the issue on that side is, while we've done an awful lot of work on the data infrastructure side for persistent data capability, is it really still ready to take on some of these higher availability database applications that have to deliver? Or is it still really designed for those, more of the web apps, maybe the GenAI stuff is all going to get developed there. So we'll still have a set of items that are going to stay on a virtualized server environment that are database oriented, very block oriented, et cetera, in that space. And so those decisions about, where we're going to have. So I still believe that we're going to end up with multiple platforms,
Oh, yeah.
And also that, what is available right now on maybe OpenShift or SUSE from an open source virtualized server environment is not a complete solution that could compete really well with an entire VCF kind of environment. It's not as easy to use. So we're going to still, that those choices that they're having to make are extremely difficult. Then the last thing that I think will happen is, there will be some cost or some pricing negotiations going on. Question is that a one-time negotiation with VMware to get, maybe for the next 2 years not to have to face it, and what happens after the 2 years after that? Where does that go? Frankly, I wouldn't want to be the CIO having to make these decisions.
Camberley, I was just thinking that, Camberley, it's almost, we have the easy job, right? In this scenario, right? We can kind of analyze, maybe provide some guidance, but your CIO has the difficult job, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's not just a TCO decision.
Right.
It's not a total cost of ownership decision, because usually when you look at total cost of ownership, I'm looking at, okay, if I build this stack of systems, this is what it's going to cost me to do this virtualization, this network, this data storage, this whatever. Maybe not. It's maybe it's somewhat less than the VCF stack. Okay, great, whatever. But it's how do you put, and we often call it soft costs, but they're not. How do you put a value on there, and then you have that conversion or conversion costs that you have, and what that takes in terms of, if I take my eye off the ball on the critical applications that I've got to deliver in order to enable this migration, do I fall behind competitively?
Right.
And how do I put a dollar? You have to put a dollar on that. And that reminds me, many, many years ago, when I was working for IBM and I was dealing with a client that had another mainframe. So that's how how long ago it was. And they were having to, even though they knew that company eventually would probably be out of business in terms of the mainframe business, which they are, and we were talking about having them migrate to IBM mainframe. This is in the 80s. And we're dealing at the board level in this situation. And the board comes back, the executives come back, and they say, we know we should be on the IBM mainframe. Makes all the sense of the world. Strategically, it's where we need to be, but we cannot stop development because we would be far behind
Right.
competitive situation.
Right.
And, for as a 20-year-old sales rep working for IBM at the time, it was devastating. But, it's all about me, right? But then you think about what has to happen, what strategically, their business decision was probably the right decision for the company.
Right.
At least for right now. I can kick the problem down the pike about 5 more years and before I actually have to make any kind of decision on it. So that is my long, not quite soliloquy on where VMware is and those decisions that are having to be made. But, the recommendation to the IT guys is you got to look at all of the factors in terms of the business impact, the operational impact, as well as the infrastructure cost impact. And those are and there's no easy answer here. There is no easy answer.
There's not. There's definitely not.
So,
All right. Well, Camberley, unless you had anything else, I think we're awesome. All right. I think we're out of
we'll let
time.
everybody just dust, tune off, kind of dust the sand off your feet, go jump in the water again, and then come back next week and listen to our next podcast.
Absolutely. A great conclusion. Thank you, Camberley, and thank you everyone for listening. Like Camberley's mentioning, please make sure to like and subscribe so that way you don't miss any of our future episodes. We are producing these every week. Please, leave us some comments. We love the engagement. We love to take your feedback, and we will see you on the next one.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.